patient, and most of the patients weren't terminally ill. They simply had a condition that they were being treated for in other ways, where there was hope of a cure. If you ever go to Switzerland, don't stay at a place called Dignitas. They are enjoying a booming suicide tourism industry, where not only the spouses take their loved ones for termination, but sometimes they engage in a murder-suicide pact, even if the spouse is perfectly healthy. The Swiss Supreme Court created a constitutional right to euthanasia for the mentally ill. In the UK, a debate is now raging publicly over legalized assisted suicide and euthanasia. I want to quote from an article last week. Since Kay Gilderdale was acquitted of murder charges in the death of her daughter, she has been transformed into the poster girl of Britain's increasingly vocal and popular euthanasia movement. Kay Gilderdale admitted assisting the suicide of her 31-year-old daughter, Lynn, who had suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome. Kay Gilderdale admitted to providing a lethal overdose of painkillers that her daughter administered to herself through an IV drip, and said she had found her daughter injecting morphine and had brought her more when asked. She also injected air into her daughter's veins. The not guilty verdict took only 2 hours for the jury to deliver and was greeted in the gallery with applause and weeping. The judge who acquitted Gilderdale paid tribute to the jury's, quote, common sense, decency, and humanity in acquitting Gilderdale. This beautifully illustrates an observation by Yuval Levin in his book, Imagining the Future. Today, he notes, the purpose of society has shifted. It is no longer to help citizens lead virtuous lives. Now it is to help them avoid suffering. This quickly evolves into eliminating the sufferer. And it's very hard to fight this mentality in an anti-Christian environment. Baroness Mary Warnock, known in the UK as the philosopher queen of bioethics, said in a televised debate last week that the refusal of doctors to participate in assisted suicide is, quote, genuinely wicked, unquote. Paraphrasing her, one article reported that she said, unlike gold and platinum, life does not have value in itself. Closer to home in Canada, 50% of the euthanasia deaths are non-voluntary. The US is not far behind. Oregon was the first state to legalize assisted suicide. Washington State joined them in 2008. Montana by a Supreme Court ruling in 2010. Oregon has universal health care for all residents, but of course disallows some medical treatments as not being cost-effective, such as new cancer drugs. 2 cancer-stricken Oregonians received official notices from the state health department last year that Oregon was going to decline to pay for medications that could have prolonged their lives by 6 months to a year or longer. But in the letter advising them that wouldn't be covered, they did remind the 2 patients that assisted suicide pills would be covered. Fortunately, the patients brought this to the attention of the press, and Oregon backed down in a way. They said they would no longer put that information in writing. Helpful. Recent studies on assisted suicide practice in Oregon have revealed that referrals for psychiatric counseling are falling. Family members are engaging in doctor shopping until they find an MD who is willing to off grandpa. And a small number of MDs are writing prescriptions for numerous suicides. Oh, here's a real death with dignity case for you. Kitty Goody suffered from progressive dementia, but was apparently still in sound mind, and her husband, Daniel Goody, MD, I quote from their death notice, chose to leave this world with dignity on July 18, 2010, by asphyxiating themselves with helium pumped into plastic bags over their heads while seated in the front seat of their car in the garage of their fancy River Hills, Wisconsin home. As appalling as that murder-suicide should be to us, the comments posted at the end of the news story were even more chilling. Readers kept referring to their courage and wrote, for example, "My heart soars with the thought that someday it will really be a supported choice." And "This is the most heart-wrenching and romantic real-life story. I deeply respect Danny and Kitty's choice. Another said, I always admired them, even more so now. Another, I'm happy they were able to go on their own terms. I only wish we could provide this option to everyone. We don't know, frankly, how many Terri Schiavos are dying every day. She suffered an appalling death, painful death by dehydration. But we know about Terri Schiavo only because her family, some of her family members objected to her death. In untold number of cases, families and medical personnel reach agreement, no one complains, and the victim slips quietly away, and no one's the wiser. Moving on to disabled children, I've already mentioned the attitude of doctors whose livelihood is at the mercy of tort lawyers. But here's an astonishing example of modern thought displayed on a BBC program in the past month. The topic of conversation was aborting children with a disability. Virginia Ironside, a British pundit, offered this viewpoint, quote, if a baby's going to be born severely disabled or totally unwanted, surely an abortion is the act of a loving mother. And she added, if I were the mother of a suffering child, I mean a deeply suffering child, I would be the first to want to put a pillow over its face. If it was a child I really loved who was in agony, I think any good mother would. Moving to abortion, let's start with partial birth abortion. The world learned about partial birth abortion in 1993, and efforts began almost at once to ban the practice in the states and at the federal level. It took 14 years till 2007 to have a permanent ban enacted, signed into law and judged constitutional by the Supreme Court. 14 years to halt an extraordinarily barbaric method of killing a mostly born child. Partial birth abortion is not the worst of it, though. Maybe a decade ago, Jill Stanek, a Chicago area nurse, exposed midterm inductions being performed on unwanted babies at a hospital in suburban Chicago, not a Catholic hospital, after which babies were put in back rooms where they struggled for life for hours. It's happening in many hospitals. Just an induction, it's not an abortion, they say. Baby dies, sure, but the baby died because it was premature. I read a news article last week that the staff of Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, Royal Women's Hospital are having a hard time coping with a 6-fold increase in late-term abortions since abortion was decriminalized in Victoria 2 years ago. One nurse trainee, the report said, was deeply traumatized when she was told to drop a living newborn into a bucket of formaldehyde. In 2007, they report 52 children survived late-term abortions and were put on shelves and left to die. Recent figures are not available, but somebody estimated a 6-fold increase in such deaths, perhaps 300 a year now. In April of this year, a baby boy was born alive at 22 weeks in a hospital in southern Italy after a botched abortion. He was thought to have a disability of some sort. The doctors left him to die, umbilical cord still attached. 20 hours later, Father Antonio Martello, the hospital chaplain, began to pray next to his little body and discovered he was moving and breathing on his own. Doctors transferred him to a hospital with a neonatal ICU, but he died the following day. In the U.S., just in the last couple months, there have been raids on various abortion clinics where gross malpractice claims have been lodged for death and disabling injury to moms. And police have found jars, many, many, many jars, of later-term fetal corpses in Philadelphia, Maryland, and New Jersey. And mid-trimester babies are being born alive in abortion clinics all over the country. Some of these kids have been adopted. Others have been left to die. During debates on partial birth abortion, Senator Santorum asked Senator Barbara Boxer, who is still today a senator, if a child acquires the right to life after he or she is completely separated from the mom. Now we know where Senator Santorum was going. He assumed she'd say yes, and then he was going to move back in time to when the baby's, half delivered and so forth. She refused to buy into his game and said, a child has a right to life, quote, when you bring your baby home, the baby belongs to the family and has all the rights. She's not alone. Senator Russ Feingold, who's still a senator from Wisconsin, and Nancy Pelosi, still Speaker of the House, also refused to be trapped into saying when a human child acquires the right to life. I want to touch briefly on in vitro fertilization, which everybody thinks is such a pro-life thing to do, to bring a new child into the world, to enlarge a family. It had been thought until recently that 80% of the children created through in vitro fertilization would die in the process, not make it to a live birth. But a study that came out a few days ago reports now that an estimated 7.5% of babies created through IVF make it to birth. The rest, 92.5%, are discarded, die, or are aborted later through selective reduction. This industry is a $3.3 billion industry, and it is completely unregulated. Octomom gave birth, to 14 kids through in vitro fertilization. An Indian woman, Rajo Devi Lohan, gave birth at age 70. She's now 72, but reportedly dying from complications from her IVF pregnancy. The former world's oldest mom, Maria del Carmen Busada of Spain, recently died, leaving behind 2-year-old twins. Earlier this month, a judge in New York gave permission for a widow to be inseminated with her dead husband's sperm because they had been thinking of starting a family before he was killed in an accident. And there's one person whose rights are never considered in IVF: the children conceived with donated sperm. These kids are coming of age and writing of the emptiness they feel in not knowing half their identity. One article's title put it well: "My daddy's name is donor." Many go to great lengths to learn their father's identity, only to find out that they have a dad who's not really interested in their life, and also, rather awkwardly, that they have half-siblings all over the United States. Moving to contraception, quickly. You know what, maybe we'll skip some of these rather dark things. Contraception has moved from being heavily dependent on estrogen in the early days when it was truly contraceptive, to now the FDA has recently approved a drug, Ella, which works exactly like RU46. It can do nothing else other than cause the death of a child. But we have to remember that all hormonal contraceptives are abortifacient, potentially. These drugs are incredibly dangerous for women, and yet that's the only answer that the ruling elite tell us that we need to keep control over the stigma of and problem of unmarried births in the country. Women are dying right and left, young, healthy women from the ortho-ever patch. And estrogen has been declared a carcinogen by the World Health Organization. The increase in breast cancer is appalling among young people, although it's now, the rates are now going down dramatically among older women because they stopped taking hormone replacement therapy. Embryonic stem cell research, my gosh, monumental waste of time and money. Proponents and the politicians who are talking about these marvelous cures that we'll achieve from embryonic stem cell research, they're not likely ever to have any clinical use. It is far too complex. The tissues, embryonic tissues, are very plastic. They grow uncontrollably. They cause tumors when they're implanted into the hosts.